TV show about cryptozoology, natural history, green issues and whatever else the team feel like making up as they go along. Enjoy!
So what's in today's show, Mr. John?
Well, Hennis, a few weeks ago we went to one of the suburbs of Burnham-on-Sea in North Somerset for a day conference organised by Daniel Barnett, who was our guest last week, and basically on the subject of British Bigfoot. Now, this is a subject that has always interested me, even though in recent years my stance on the subject has caused quite a few unpleasant ructions amongst the hoi polloi of British Bigfooters. But these guys, Daniel, his family and his crew, are fantastic researchers. I'm very, very impressed with them. And for the first time in 7 years, I came out and I gave a lecture. The last lecture I gave was at the 2016 Weird Weekend, and after that we didn't do any more Weird Weekends because first of all Mother was dying with dementia, and then a few years later Karina came down with cancer, which, as you know, killed her about 3 years ago. Then we had COVID and all sorts of other things, and to be quite honest, I lost the enthusiasm to do public speaking. But Daniel asked me if I'd give a lecture, and I did give a lecture, which you're going to see in a minute. And I tell you what, boys and girls, I enjoyed it mightily. So, whatever happens, I'm back in the saddle.
I really like the old credits.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. It's Saturday afternoon and welcome to another episode of On the Track. My name is John Downs and I'm the director of the Centre for Fortean. Excuse me, something very peculiar is happening over there. It seems to be emanating from the Brixton area.
So, Rossiter, have you got any festive treats lined up for all the kids at the Brixton Youth Outreach Centre?
Oh, Barry, yes, we got a lovely festive trip for them.
And where are you taking them?
We're taking them to the gelignite, mantrap and nitric acid factory. It has very poor safety record.
Let's try that again. Hello, ladies and gentlemen, my name's John Downs, and over there is Lilith, my favourite of the CFZ cats, Lilith Tinkerbell Downs, in fact, if we're going to give her her full name. And welcome to another episode of On the Track. For those of you who don't know, every Wednesday evening at 6:30 for about a quarter of an hour, and every Saturday afternoon at 3 for about twice that, we bring you a miscellany, a mishmash, a melange, and all sorts of other things beginning with N, of hard science, weird shit, and surreality. Do you know what surreality is? Well, I've got a special guest here in the studio today, and I think you should really ask him.
Georgie was a little weed. His muscles weak and puny. His girl's bike had a floral theme, and he listened to DJ Spoonie.
For 17 years I promoted the annual CFZ conference, the Weird Weekend, and I know to my cost quite how much hard work, concentration and sheer panic is involved. I think that young Daniel, who instead of being a man in his late 40s and his 50s, with quite a large team supporting him and helping him get everything done, is a 14-year-old with a helpful and supportive family and a crew of local friends, did absolutely magnificently.
No, she's just going to say it loudly.
Okay. Right. Done. Hi ladies and gentlemen. Hello. Ladies and gentlemen, we're ready for our next guest. Very pleased to have with us this morning, or this afternoon almost, Jonathan Downs, cryptologist. Over to you.
Cryptozoologist? How dare you accuse me of being cryptology? I don't know anything about taking codes apart. Nothing I'm leaving.
Just to get you back home when we're having our video chat and you're rude.
I was not rude to you.
I'll dismiss her.
I'm never rude to lovely ladies. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. My name's John Downs. I'm the director of an organisation called the Centre for Fortean Zoology, which for the last 32 years has been going all around the world, and I believe that we are now the biggest and the longest standing general cryptozoology group in the English-speaking world. There's a bunch in Japan who I know are much bigger than us, and there's a bunch in Mexico who are bigger than us, but I believe that we are the largest cryptozoological group in the English-speaking world, and I and Richard Freeman, who you saw earlier, Richard, wave to the boys and girls. Richard and I think, as does he there, we all think this is actually the best. But I can't say so because that would blow my own trumpet, and that would be vulgar. My late father said, you can do anything you want in this life, boy, as long as you don't descend into vulgarity. Which has always been something with which I have lived my life. Now, there's something, I'm very interested in the stuff that Darren talked about in the previous talk, but I've got one thing I want to challenge him. And that's because personally, I hate the words supernatural and paranormal. That's because I think these things are perfectly natural and perfectly normal and just the way things are. They are just defined by laws of science that we don't understand yet. And I believe that it is the job of groups like this one and the Centre for Fortean Zoology to try and uncover and explain the laws of science that we don't actually understand yet. Some cryptids or cryptozoological animals are undoubtedly new species of animal, new carbon-based life forms as real as any of us in this room. Well, I'm not quite sure about this, but the same as anybody in this room and your pet dog, your pet cat and your pet budgies are at home. They are all carbon-based flesh and blood life forms which are defined by known laws of physics. That's the first of cryptids. The trouble is that cryptids, being a neologism, which was started about, I think, 50 years ago, its definition changes as with each year that comes. And this is something that requires what happens in cryptozoology. I'm sure you've all heard the word chupacabra. Do you know, does anyone who doesn't know what chupacabra is? Does everybody know vaguely, or do you want an explanation? Okay, ever since 1996, in the Canovenas Plateau in the center of Puerto Rico, there have been reports of a strange creature walking semi-bipedally and having spikes at its back. The story goes that these creatures are vampiric in nature, and they can prey on the local livestock from the local farmers and drain them of blood. And this is a really nasty story. I've got loads of very unpleasant photographs of creatures that have been attacked with chupacabra. But over the years, in 2001, I believe, a man called Devin McAnally, who lives in a place just outside San Antonio in Texas, found what he thought was a monstrous as in weird, not monstrous as in huge, because the creature's only about this size, but a dog, bright blue with no hair. And so he did what is there any Americans here? Thank God for that. He did what all Americans do under pretty well any circumstance. He shot the poor bloody thing. And he took a Polaroid photograph of it to the lady who ran the local convenience store, and she's Hispanic descent, and she said, "Oh, Senor McAnally, it looks like you have something like a chupacabra as well." And that afternoon, Devin met a bloke from the local press and told him this, and all across the world now these blue dogs from Texas are called chupacabra. They have absolutely nothing to do with the original Puerto Rico creature, but the name is used across the board. Now, even in Russia, parts of Spain, a lot along a wide section of the world now has what they call chupacabra reports, and they're nothing to do with the original ones. They are just called chupacabra because that has become a catch-all neologism for bogeyman, for monster, for scary thing that comes in the night. Now, the same thing has happened to the word cryptid. I think, Richard, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think cryptid came from Willie Lay.
No, it's much more recent.
Who was it? Okay, it was more recent than I thought. Cryptid originally meant unknown flesh and blood animals, which are the animals which are studied by hardline cryptozoologists like me and Richard and Cameron, my dear PA, and V, who's looking very pensive, and as of the last few months, Daniel and his crew. But the word cryptid has become perverted again, if you like. I'm using the word perverted in the true sense of the English language, and from being a word for an unknown species of animal. It's become, so many people are now using it to describe things that are, and I'm now going to use the word I dislike, paranormal. And the word cryptid is becoming more, in fact, very much what the word chupacabra has become across the Hispanic world. It is a catch-all phrase for things that go bump in the night, as well as new species of animals. Lots of things people talk about cryptids, including, most annoying, things that we know are not just something that is not defined by laws of zoology, but something we know is completely made up, like Slender Man. And Slender Man, as I believe most of you will probably know, was a hoax thing made up by somebody on, I think it was 4chan. Wasn't it, Richard?
It's creepypasta.
Creepypasta. It was one of these things that some kid who was rather good at drawing things and a very good imagination, he drew these things, made up a story about them, and there are people all over the world now who believe in their literal existence. What was the other one, Richard, you told me? Something called The Rake, which I don't know anything about, apart from Richard has shown me pictures supposedly of it and told me the story. But all around the world, people actually believe in this stuff. The last time this happened on any great scale was in the First World War. A novelist and short story writer called Aforementioned wrote a lovely, very, very patriotic and, I'm not sure how you describe it, short story to boost the morale of the soldiers in the trenches. And this was a short story that outside Mons in Belgium, a platoon of British soldiers were being overcome by a big group of the German army, and then the clouds opened, and out came angels from heaven with long arms, and basically made an incident of the Germans. If there's any Germans in the room, I'm sorry, I'm not trying to offend you. They're in Germany. You German be. Well, that's it. I don't want to I'm very good at offending me. I just don't want to do it on purpose. So, one of the big questions that people ask me all the time, do I believe in British Bigfoot? Yes, I do. I've seen one. I am convinced that they exist. I have also received, believe it or not, death threats from people in the Bigfooting community. We've got to get rid of that John Downs. He says that Bigfoot in Bowland Lake in Northumberland can't be flesh and blood animals. And so they did their best to what I believe these days is called cancelling. And I got kicked out of all the internet Bigfoot groups, and all sorts of nasty things happened. Bowland Lake in Northumberland is where Richard and I went on a mini expedition just over 20 years ago, January 2003, was somewhere where over about 6 weeks there'd been a whole string of reports of a Bigfoot-like creature. It's only about 40 acres, and despite what you might say about Sunderland supporters, the idea of there being a flesh and blood, unknown, higher primate living in a forest 40 miles north of Newcastle is, I'm afraid, frankly ridiculous. But I saw something. There were 4 of us sat on the bonnet of my car. I don't have a decent car now, I can't drive anymore, and there's no point in having something you enjoy driving if you can't drive. But in those days, I'd inherited my dad's old Jaguar, and there were 4 of us sitting on the bonnet of the Jaguar. And this is where it gets weird. We saw, and it's a much longer story than this, but I'll just tell you the Jack and John version, which probably nobody under the age of 50 will know what that means. But I saw over a stretch of about 12 yards. I know this, I'm terrible at estimating distance, but I noted the 2 trees that this thing, whatever it was, ran between. And it was very tall. Does anybody remember the computer game Doom 2? Okay, it had this weird skeletal looking, very thin creature with a big head and angular arms and legs. And I saw something like this, but completely jet black. And not even black like an animal or a thing would be. It was like a shape of nothingness in the shape of one of these creatures against reality. It was a whole of reality. And I saw it running like that, and then it took about a second and a half maybe, from right to left. And then a couple of seconds later, the same thing happened from left to right. Of the 4 of us who were sitting on the bonnet of my car, 2 of us saw it. The other 2 didn't. And this is something which happens over and over and over again in Fortean zoology. You have situations, and maybe some of you who are investigators will have experienced this. You have investigations when a bunch of people sitting in the same place, 2 of them, or half of them, some of them, can see something, and the others who are sitting right next to them can't see anything at all. And this has always fascinated me and intrigued me. About 3 years ago, this is the first talk I've given for the last 6 years, because 6 years ago my mother-in-law got dementia, and a few years after that my wife had cancer, and I was a nurse many years ago, and Staff Nurse Downs came out of retirement, and I looked after both of them until they died. But I spent a lot of time watching YouTube videos and reading books with my mother-in-law, who just liked the company, even though I don't think she knew what the hell I was watching. And one day I came across a very interesting video about the work of a guy called, this is bloody ridiculous, I can't remember his name. Richard, what's his name? And Robert Anton Wilson. I'm sorry about that. Robert Anton Wilson came up, he was a very well-known philosopher, and he came up with an idea that he called reality tunnels. There are, I'm sure, people in this room who know a hell of a lot more about the electromagnetic rays and the electromagnetic stimuli which hit all of us, all of the time. One of the stupidest things people say is that we have 5 senses: touch, taste, hearing, smell, and whatever the other one is. There are actually something like 45 that I know, because as well as all those things, we are sensitive to pressure, we're sensitive to pain, we are sensitive to some magnetic frequencies, some people more than others. We are sensitive to gravity, and the list goes on and on and on. Every moment of every day, everybody in this room, and in fact everybody and every animal in the world, is under bombardment from dozens and dozens of different stimuli. And I am certain that we're under bombardment from stimuli that we don't even know about yet. Because the human race thinks we know everything, but we don't, we know that all. And for the human race to think that we're the masters of the universe, the masters of science, we're not. We're just a bunch of monkeys that got lucky. I sincerely believe, and this isn't my idea, this is Robert Anton Wilson, that our brains, our subconscious, are not strong enough, not sensitive enough, not clever enough, wrong word that we do, to understand, map and act upon all these different stimuli which are coming from everywhere. They're coming from everywhere, they're coming from the distant stars, they're coming from the bloke who sits next to you, they're coming from the smell from the fish and chip shop down the road. We're all bombarded, inundated with all this stuff. And our subconscious has to explain, has to deal with all this stuff, and it has to decide what of the different stimuli it's actually going to pay attention to. That doesn't mean that it doesn't act on these other bits, that it doesn't do it consciously. And each subconscious and each brain are different. We know from anybody doing neurological science that the biology, the makeup, the chemical makeup, the neurons of every single person and animal are slightly different. Which means each of us is going to perceive what happens slightly differently. Sometimes very slightly, sometimes surprisingly differently. And that is, I think, a very good place to start by accepting that whether or not you believe in Robert Anton Wilson's theory of reality tunnels, that each of us has our own reality tunnel constructed by our brain and our consciousness, and each of us has a slightly different type of reality, a slightly different view of reality. Until people start to accept this, I think we are not going to get very far in trying to explain why across the world some Bigfoot type things as the late great Highbridge scientists used to call them, why some of these things are obviously animals and why some of these things are obviously something else entirely. So, I started the Centre for Fortune Theology 32 years ago because I wanted to try and bring some sort of scientific method into the study, not just of cryptozoology, but of the weird stuff that so many people have been talking about today. People used to say, John, you're not a scientist. And I said, no, I'm a journalist, ex-nurse and ex-rock singer. And they'd say, well, you're talking to us about monsters. And I'm saying, one, because I know what I'm talking about, and two, because I can. And they said the same sort of thing to Richard when he went to university, and then rather than actually finishing his course, he came down and spent a lot of time with me, drinking alongside and behaving incredibly badly. This was when we were youngsters, boys and girls, and I don't want anybody here to think I'm trying to encourage anybody to go in my footsteps. If you want to go in my footsteps, be prepared to be in a wheelchair, that's how you really sits there. But, about 5 years ago, I heard a new term I'd never heard before, and that was citizen scientist. There are two ways to do what we do. You can bugger about, pretend you're like most haunted, and rush in and out of the thing and say, there's a Sasquatch in Member Woods. Or you can try and do it properly. You can keep notes of what you do. You can write up your expeditions. You can write up your investigations. And you can make real documentation of all your findings. And I hate to admit, but for the last 3 or 4 weeks, I've been bullying him massively into keeping written records of all the stuff that they do. The organisation I run is also a publisher, and we've got a couple of books to over there. We sold most of the ones we've bought today, and a couple more in the raffle. But one of the things that Richard and I do, we publish a full-length yearbook, which actually comes out every 2 years, but that's because since my wife died, since various other people have died or had to retire, I have to do, Richard and I, and dear Karen there, and the lady called Guinevere in Exeter are basically doing most of this stuff. We've got researchers around the world, but basically I'm the only one who works full time on this. But we publish a biannual yearbook. We publish a journal that comes out 4 times a year, and we do publish something called a peer-reviewed journal called the Journal of Cryptozoology, which is in abeyance at the moment. But I promised Daniel, because I think what he's done here today is absolutely brilliant, and I'm so impressed with what him and his crew are doing. They are absolutely bloody fantastic, and I take my hat off to him, and I take my hat off to his family for having encouraged him and shown him the right direction. But I don't want him to have to learn all the very dull and convoluted skills you need to do publishing that doesn't look awful. So I've promised Daniel and other members of his crew that we will publish, Richard and my journal, will publish anything that they send in about their records, because that will, and we'll also do anything we can to help things get properly analysed. Because if it is not written down, and if people across the world haven't got hard copy books, all you need is to have, and at the moment I'm afraid it's looking more likely than it has since I was a very little boy. It looks like there might well be some big electromagnetic explosions in the next few years, and that scares the hell out of me. And that is also going to wipe out most of the internet as we know it. So, if you only have it on a jolly set of videos and a Facebook page, all it needs is an electromagnetic accident, whether it's caused by a war or whether it's caused by sunspots or anything else. It means that these things will be lost for good. So I very much hope Daniel's going to take us up on our offer, and I don't know where you are now, Daniel, but if there's anything ever we can do, then please just ask. And that, there's one thing you can't do, don't set V. McCrinnan onto me for the phone call at 2 o'clock in the morning another day when I've got the up at 7. But apart from that, we will do anything we can for you, Daniel. Well done, mate, and you have no idea how proud of you we all are. And thank you for letting us be part of this.
You're very, very welcome.
Awkward for a moment now.
No, I thought it was understanding.
If you want to support us and help us make more content like these, please press like, subscribe, follow our Facebook page and check out our Patreon.
And there's the ghost of Joe Strummer, who's an ever more regular visitor to my little house, will tell you. Don't forget to ring the notification bell, otherwise you won't be told when the next episode's gonna be. And that would be an awful pity, wouldn't it?
If you've been affected by any of the topics in today's episode, you can just bugger off, because we don't give a monkeys. Bloody well get a grip. Sort your own bloody problems out rather than ringing up somewhere.
And so here we are at the end of another episode. I want to say a big thank you to everybody but for whom this show wouldn't have been made, particularly Daniel Barnett and his friends and family, and everybody else who organised the Littlefoot Day in Burnham-on-Sea a couple of weeks ago. I'd like to say a big thank you to Karen and Richard Heath for bringing me all the way from Wolseley at an ungodly time of the morning all the way to Burnham-on-Sea, and for looking after me during the day, especially when I had a minor diabetic episode and fell asleep. I'd also like to say a big thank you to Karen, who for once swapped her secretary hat to be my dear sweet amanuensis and camera person. And I'd like to say a big thank you to Richard Freeman for all sorts of things and for his contributions to this week's show. I'm going to be back on Wednesday and we're going to have a book review. And I'm going to be back on Saturday. I have no idea what's going to be on Saturday's show. Do you remember, Richard? I know I said something. You don't remember, I'm sure.
You have that man that communicates in inarticulate grunts.
Possibly. but I think it's more likely that I've got somebody a little bit more articulate, because I've made a list here on my diary. Yes, ladies and gentlemen, I am so organised now that I have a Google diary on my iPad. And next week we have the wonderful, the immortal and invisible Ronan Coghlan, and he's going to be talking about cryptids that are only ever seen the once. And it's a fascinating interview. I very much look forward to it. Are you looking forward to it, Mr. McQuillan? Because you should be looking forward to it. Because I'm going to be in the studio here, joining in the live chat and doing all the other stuff I do and sending out notifications and things. And if I'm here doing that and you are sitting at home in Bristol watching the show, I'll be seeing you.